Awesome. We are live here. It's design workshop part 1. So last week we did kind of preparing for the design workshop. So if you missed that one, go back and check that one out. There's a lot that you want to think about prior to the workshops. But today and next week we're gonna actually be inside the workshop. So today we're gonna do part 1. So it's the first 3 segments of the workshop: empathy, define, and ideate. Again, I'm Eric Schneider. I'm president, co-founder of Innovate K-12. Kristen Daniels is with me, my co-founder and executive director extraordinaire. And we are going to just, we're going to try to keep this to 20, 25 minutes. And so we may go a little bit beyond 20 minutes, but we're going to give it a shot. And I hope the internet connection stays strong. We will see. Can you see what does that look like in my background? It's a beautiful ceiling, but I'm in a hotel and I'm not sure what my quality is here. So let's get started. I'm going to click to the next slide, and hold on a second. I got to move my screen around a little bit. There we go. So guys, here's just an agenda for the day here. For the webinar. I'm going to start off with just talking about getting the room ready. So just kind of making sure the space is how you want it going in. Spend a few minutes on that. And then, kind of as I said, we're going to do the first 3 of the 5 segments of the workshop: empathy, define, and ideate. And, I always say empathy is the real key to quality design, because if you don't go deep into empathy, chances are your solutions are going to miss an important component. So it really starts with empathy. You'll notice that we spend twice as much time on empathy than the other 4 steps. So that breaks down to be 40 minutes for us. So 40, 20, 20, 20, 20 is 2 hours. So for us, it's the most important step. And then we'll do define, which is our narrowing of the focus, and then we'll ideate. That's that brainstorming section. And something that it's a little disclaimer up there in the upper right corner. There's not one single correct way to facilitate one of these workshops. So we don't mean to give that impression. These are suggestions. They're things that have worked for us. So we have evidence that these practices work, but there's a ton of stuff on the internet around design thinking or human-centered design that you are free to harvest and use. Some of it you'll see in our slide deck. Again, something I talked about last week, we really try to do this in a window, because we know that it's not easy to get reserves, and it's not easy to, teachers don't have a lot of time. We always like to say, this is the only meeting we're going to have before we start testing our prototype. So we really try to be respectful of teachers' time or educators, because we get both certified and non-certified staff in the room. So that's kind of a disclaimer, but let's go ahead and jump in here to the next slide. So gang, this is about getting the room ready. And so we just really believe, when people walk in the room, they should feel like they're in a special space. So, when they come in the room, you're going to want to have, Post-it notes and markers and things up on the table. We think it's really smart to have some kind of an overview of the process, maybe like a one sheet that describes so that people have some, the folks who sit down first can sit down and kind of read through, get some anticipation going about what the workshop's going to look like. There's a facilitation deck here, Kristen. Should I hit that?
You don't need to hit it. I just put it in there because when we did it, I liked having slides to sort of remind people what they were supposed to be doing. And so that is a resource that's in the shared Google Doc folder, and that is on our website, innovatek12.org, under the cohort tab. And then the password is IK12 cohort. So there's a ton of resources in there. I just put it in to make sure you guys knew that there's a folder called Design Challenge or Design Workshop, and it has a lot of the resources that you're going to see here in that folder.
Great. So getting the room ready, I kind of went out of order here on my bullets, but the setting of norms, that's right at the very beginning. That is super, super important. And so, just to start off with your group, after you've done some introductions and whatnot, you're really walking through the norms that are going to be really important for the workshop to be successful. Deferring judgment, that's super important. People have to understand that the spirit of this is to really come up with new ideas. So it's not always going to be comfortable. So defer that judgment. The fact that it's that workshop space, that's a team of equals. So there's no titles. There's no principal, teacher, superintendent. It's like everybody's the same in that space. So it's super important to emphasize that. This one for me is critical, and that is say it with Post-it notes. When people have this discomfort with going ahead and moving to the Post-it note, but they just want to say what they're thinking, and you got to really hit the timeout on that and say, hey, grab the Post-it note, write it down, get it up on the wall. That's something that that's a norm that we like to really emphasize. Sounds like they're rolling in some furniture behind me here. Sorry about that.
It's not affecting your audio. You sound fine.
Okay, thanks. Here, that fourth one, super important, bias toward action. That's something that, we really like to emphasize that, again, there's not going to be another meeting after this. We are going into testing of our prototype after this workshop. People won't believe you, but I tell you, it's the best way to earn their trust is to stick to that. Active listening is super important. The folks at IDEO say, one conversation at a time or one idea at a time. And it's really, I think it's super important that everybody be super attentive to the person who's speaking. There's going to be some chaos in the room. So, you're going to, as a facilitator, you have to manage that chaos. But when someone's talking, you really have to have that active listening norm. The yes and is sort of ties back to deferring judgment. So it's that idea that you never want to say, oh no, let's not do that. Let's do this instead. It says, yes, I love that, and we could also do this. So you're always building on top of someone's previous thought. That next one, that get up and move. This is a physical workshop. Like if you're facilitating this and people are sitting, you're doing it wrong. Like people have to be up and moving Post-it notes around and up at the wall and back and forth. It's got to be very active. It's super important. I guarantee you, this is the fastest 2 hours of your life. Like it will fly by. And then, that last bullet, that wild ideas are okay. I mean, you really want to encourage people to think outside of the box. Sometimes, that wild idea, if you just scale it back a little bit, it's doable. So that's something to set at the beginning of the workshop as a norm. It's like, it's okay to be outside of the box. We're encouraging that. Doesn't mean those ideas are going to take us to the prototype. It just means that we want those thoughts up on the wall. Anything to add, Kristen? I
just was going to say that at the end of your slide deck, when we talk about ideation, I have some good examples of why that's important.
Super. And then just depending on kind of what your support team looks like, or how how you're staffed for your workshop. I think it's nice to have some roles, like to have a facilitator, but then also someone who's kind of assigned to be a note taker to kind of keep track of the conversation. Timekeeper is super important. You want to keep this thing moving. Norm checker, this could be fun just to have somebody who agrees to be the one to check to make sure we're always following our norms. It's kind of it's a fun role. Some people enjoy that. I've assigned the role of researcher, somebody who's got their laptop ready. It's like if we need someone to research something, to Google something, like they're ready to go. It's nice when people get to feel like they've got a really active role in the encourage you to experiment with that. I found that to work. Take care of your attendees. You got to have some chocolate. It's Halloween, so grab some of those chocolate bars and put them on the table. We used to bring in a pizza halfway through. That was always popular. But just try to take care of folks because that's important that people's needs are attended to. I talked through that last bullet. Make sure that the walls are ready for action. You're going to really use your wall space. I've led these workshops where we've used all 4 walls to kind of keep this conversation alive. And so just do what you can to make sure you've got walls ready, having poster paper or something up there that you can write on so that you can, capture people's thoughts, provide some structure to the space, direct them to this wall, to that wall. You'll figure out kind of what works best for you, but the walls are super important because you want people up and moving. So I'm going to stop there. If there's a question or comment, I'll take it. Otherwise, I'm going to go to the next part of the deck. All right, gang. I'm going to keep rolling here. So again, that's getting the room ready and setting your norms. And again, I didn't talk about people introducing themselves, but obviously you want to make sure that people get to know each other a little bit. You may have folks in that room that don't know each other, so that's important to kind of move into introductions and norms as fast as possible. Here's again taking those 5 hexagons and turning them into a little more of a kind of a heat map visual here. You can see the dynamic of the workshop really follows this flow of, as you empathize, you're really flaring, meaning that you're trying to get as much empathy as you possibly can. That's a flare. And then when you shift to you really want to focus. So you'll hear those terms, flare and focus, used with human-centered design. And that's something to really think about, this kind of heat map flow image that you see here. Because once you define, then you're going to turn the corner. You're going to flare again as you ideate. So it's you want to feel that dynamic in the room as you facilitate. So important sort of visual to have in your pocket.
I would just add that that first part, the empathize, and we'll talk more about that part of it. But notice that sort of flaring is even bigger than your ideation flare. A lot of people think that design thinking is all about brainstorming and throwing out ideas. It is, but that empathy piece, as Eric has already mentioned, is critical to the process, and it's that's why they spend 40 minutes on it versus 20.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, I can't say enough about empathy as such a key part of this process, and luckily, educators are good at that. So it's not. I think you get into some professions, some engineering professions or others. I don't want to be prejudiced here against any professions, but there are some where people have a harder time with empathy. I think with educators, that's what they lead with every day with their students. So it's you shouldn't have trouble with that one. In the slide here, as I go into empathy, I'm reaching back to the last webinar where we talked about pre-workshop empathy. So there's an opportunity to even collect empathy prior to your workshop using Google Docs or other things. So check out that webinar and review those ideas if you have a minute. You also can see here on this slide the D-School Empathy Field Guide, which is awesome. It's a great way to really dig deeply into empathy as that super important part of the process. And then Kristen's also got that slide from the summit this last July where Cambridge Isanti shared their work with empathy tours, which is fantastic. So that's a great model. It takes a little bit more time. They actually went out into the spaces where those problems were happening to talk to the people who were experiencing them. Just a great model if you have the time to do that. I put in parentheses after the pre-workshop bullet there the words co-design, and it's really helpful if in the workshop you can actually have people who they themselves are experiencing the problem. That falls into the category of what we call co-design or co-create. So you're designing the solution with the people who have the problem. That's design workshop at its highest level. And when the people experiencing the problem are actually in the room, that's the best version. So if that's possible, great. If not, try to have their voice represented somehow, whether it's in the pre-workshop Google Doc that you've been working on or something. Make sure you do everything you can to get their voice in the room. And that kind of leads me to that next bullet. Who has the problem? That's what empathy is all about, right? It's about who has this problem and why does this problem exist? And really dig into what that feels like. And sometimes we talk about that strategy, the 5 whys. When someone says, it kind of describes the problem, you say, why do you think that's happening? Then they give another answer, say, well, why do you think that's happening? Just keep driving at the problem with the question why can sometimes really get you to the core of the problem, and that's what you're trying to do. Get to the core of the problem. Next bullet just talks about how people have to have that learner's mindset, really active listening, learning. All perspectives are important. And remember, we're not doing this just in conversation. We're writing this down on Post-it notes. We're putting it up on the wall. People are sitting and maybe for a few minutes capturing their thoughts on a Post-it note, but they're very quickly encouraged to get up, put it up on the wall, look at what each other is writing. If it's the kind of workshop where you're taking turns talking, it's too slow. So people are writing their thoughts down, getting them up on the wall, and moving around. And you know, the best thing to do is actually be standing by the wall with your Post-it notes and your marker and writing while you're reading and thinking and talking at the same time. Very active. I already talked about kind of bringing the voice of those impacted into the room there in that first bullet. But here's a point that I think sometimes people miss, and that is, you know, that dynamic of discovery. Like, that's what's happening during this part of the workshop. So it's okay to bring in, you know, if somebody wants to have their laptop open and be, you know, doing some quick, you know, research on the problem, that's okay. You know, you can get some great discovery going, you know, during this phase by, you know, getting on the internet and looking at how this problem is impacting people. Oftentimes you'll find great content related to the problem. So Kristen, anything you want to add here on this one?
Nope. I think, like we've said, it's an important piece, and sometimes it's hard for people to get started. But once you get started, I think I like Eric's suggestion of standing up and writing with Post-it. And I think one thing to mention about the Post-it notes is it really forces people to be succinct with their thought, not to like write in a little pen. Well, I think that da 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 da. So.
Yeah. I love that. Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, you want to really encourage people. It's just one or two words on that Post-it note, right? So you can't write a little thesis. It's got to be, you know, and sometimes you can kind of, a little bit of a strategy is to make sure that the pens you put in the room are kind of the fat Sharpies, not the narrow point pens. That just makes people write bigger, and it's a good trick. But and you know, I mean, it may take 5 or 10 minutes to kind of warm the room up and get people thinking and talking. I don't mean to imply that, you know, bam, within the first 10 minutes they're up at the wall putting Post-it notes. It may take a little discussion, warm up the room, get people to share their thoughts and feelings. What have they heard? Who have they talked to? You know, if you've got that pre-workshop empathy doc and you can be reading it. I've been in these workshops where people have they've got a great pre-workshop empathy Google Doc, and people have already read it. So they come into the workshop having already read, you know, the student interviews and the, you know, all the things that people have submitted, and they can really contribute really quickly. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes people come in and they don't have that, but you know, so takes a little bit more time to get the room warmed up. So just some things to think about there. I'm going to move ahead here, gang, to well, we've kind of hit this point that the empathize is such a big part of the process. We've touched that already, and it's the flare. So if you can kind of put yourself in that place, you've just spent 40 minutes. You've got one wall that has a ton of Post-it notes on it describing the problem. You know, people feel, you get to that place where you say, okay, do we feel like we've captured it? You know, have we represented the people who have this problem, you know, adequately? And typically you get that feeling like, okay, yeah, we've got it. Okay, so now let's move into define. And this is, you know, and I put here in the first bullet, and again, remember, this is a focused step now. So we were flaring, now we're going to focus. And this is where we bring in our sentence starter, how might we? And it's, you know, those 3 words are really critical to this process. It's a very gentle way of finding, you know, how might we create a space where students feel more comfortable? How might we? So it's a very open to the universe kind of phrasing, and it just works really nicely as a sentence starter. So that's what you want to have sort of in your head as you turn into this part of the workshop. And again, you're synthesizing. So you imagine you've got everybody up at the wall. They're looking at all these emotions and observations around the problem, and so now now we have to, you know, sort of start to think about, okay, how do we define this problem? Not define the solution. Not say, well, we need a new building. That's what we need. Well, why do you think, why is that the solution?
It sounds complicated. Like, how do you take all of these ideas and get to a finite point? But there are very specific steps. And when you're facilitating this process, all you need to do is follow the steps. And so here's what I would suggest. And this comes from IDEO as well. So in that first part, where that number one, your participants have written down things that people say, things that people do, things that people think, and things that people feel. So the next part, the next job for them to do is to look at all of those Post-it notes and to start grouping them into themes. Those themes are going to definitely be there because the design team is talking or thinking about the same people and the same problem. So there are going to be themes that evolve. And so you want to group your Post-it notes into those themes and then, figure out what that chunk is about. And what you're going to do is you're going to name each of those clusters. What is the specific piece? So this is really one strategy for sort of breaking down those BSIs, those big scary ideas. Because, okay, so Eric kind of threw out there, we need a new building. Like, that is seriously an idea that has come up before. And we're not going to solve and build a new building. But what we're going to do is we're going to empathize with the people who are experiencing that pain point. And really what's going to happen is those themes are going to be specific things that are smaller problems that would be solved by a new building. Well, we're not going to build a new building, but let's see if we could solve one of those smaller pieces. By grouping your empathy Post-its into themes, you're actually breaking down the big problem into smaller, manageable problems.
I worked with a district where they felt like their building was getting crowded, and so they were saying we need a new building. Was too old. It was too small, or they needed more space. And when they drilled down, it really wasn't that it was crowded all the time. It was just crowded at certain parts of the day. So it was alleviating those bottleneck moments in the day that solved the problem. And again, it costs nothing. It's just thinking differently about the problem. So the building feels crowded, yes, for those 3 moments during the day when everyone's moving in the halls. So how do you change the schedule of the day, right? And so it's sometimes the lean component of the solutions can just make you feel brilliant, because it's like, holy cow, we just took what was $1 million solution into a zero cost solution. So
that's awesome. And actually, Eric, I'd like to go with that idea. So we need a new building. Imagine one of those clusters on the Post-it note is crowded hallways. So I'll show you how this magically happens, you guys, where you take BSIs, these big scary ideas, and by following the rules of this process, you are able to guide the design teams into something, into solving a problem that's smaller and it's tangible to solve with a lean process. So here you take that hallways are crowded part of that problem and you create a point of view statement. And so I think that this is the hardest part to do, but if you do it well, it provides you with the most guidance for the rest of the process, because this becomes the piece that you always go back to. Because sometimes those design teams will tend to kind of, they're married to their idea. I know Eric uses that phrase. You don't want to be married to the solution. You want to be married to solving the problem.
Okay, so I am going to, these slides that you find here that are a component of the workshop are super helpful. You're really organizing, because again, remember, this is a focus segment. So you're really trying to, you see how you, in this image on the screen right here, how you've got all these Post-it notes, you're starting to cluster them together, and then you're sort of organizing them in a way that makes sense, because that's going to be really important as we get to sort of the I'm going to quickly sneak here. What I consider to be, really the most important, because you're going to have, like what you just saw in one of those images, you're going to have, several clusters up on the wall. If the problem is the building's too crowded, there's going to be several different, sort of clustered, defined statements. But this last bullet here, I think this is really important. You may have 10 or 15 how might we statements up on your sort of define board up on the wall. But here's where it's really important. You're going to just choose one. All right. And I think this is super important because, and something I often talk about in the workshop is, look, this is a huge problem in front of us. Okay. And we're going to make ourselves crazy if we think we have to solve the entire problem. Okay. I mean, I always kind of use the easy, example of world hunger. Nobody is going to solve world hunger by themselves, but you can take out a piece of that problem. And that's sort of that journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step, right? You have to solve a piece of the problem before you feel confident that you can solve, more of the problem and perhaps even eventually the whole thing. So, it's super important at this point of facilitation to really reassure people, look, we're not going to maybe solve the entirety of this problem. This is a big, hairy, scary problem, but we're going to look at all these possibilities, these defined statements. We're going to pick one that we think is within our reach. You might think of it as kind of low-hanging fruit or the quick win, but what you're going to try to do is you're going to say, okay, this is the one that we feel like we can, like we have control over this one, right? Like this is one we could actually do, right? And you get that spirit, that excitement. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of really important defined statements here, point of view, cool clusters that really capture the problem. We're not going to be able to do all of it. That's just a really important, facilitation responsibility is to help people feel okay with that and to say, but we are going to solve part of this, and we're going to find the one that we feel the most. That we feel is as a combination of we're excited about this part of the problem, and we feel like we can actually do something here. So that's an important combination. And I'm going to skip now through some of these that we've kind of touched, and I'm going to go to this one, which is the next step of the process, which is ideate. So now that we've chosen that one aspect of the problem, again, you've got 10, Post-it note clusters up on the wall, but you get everybody energized around this one cluster. Say, okay, here we go. This is the part of the problem we're going to focus on. So let's go back to that, well, we need a new elementary school because it's too crowded. And okay, so we've talked about all the crowding stuff. And now we've said, okay, well, you know what? It's only really crowded during 3 times, before school, after school, and lunch. Okay. So, okay, let's see if we can't do something about the before school hallway craziness. Right. Okay. So now we're going to solve this one part of the problem. You see what I've done there? I've taken a huge, we need a new building all the way down to, let's look at the morning, that half hour before school starts. That's the craziest time. Let's work on that one. We think we can come up with some ideas. So now we brainstorm on that. That's that aspect of the problem we're gonna chase, and we flare. All right. And now it's quantity, not quality. Crazy ideas are welcome, right? So you go ahead and encourage people to just have at it. So there's some fun here. Let people kind of go crazy. You should, they're standing at the wall. They've got their Post-it notes, their pen. They're getting, tons of ideas up on the wall. The deferred judgment is critical. Yes, and oh yeah, we could do that, and really encourage that kind of behavior, and keep people active and energized and excited during this. I mean, you don't have to worry about it; they will be, but that's the dynamic in the room. Kristen, you want to jump in?
So you can flip through the slides when you want, but I'll just say that one of the slides is linked to a video. Which is from the Apollo 13 movie. I wouldn't break the momentum of the process with this movie, but sometimes I show that at the beginning. You don't have to play it, because I want people to get into the spirit of this creative problem solving. And what's cool about this clip is that they actually have limitations. So the limitations Innovate K-12 talks about is that lean process, but the Apollo 13 in this clip, their limitations were they only had the resources that were on the Apollo ship, or the Apollo, whatever you call it. Right. So it's kind of a fun way to get people excited. So yeah, Eric talks about deferred judgment, all wild ideas, and then you can flip through to the end. I think the last slide Yeah, Joe, the last slide is that. Yes. Okay, good. Okay, so Joe
That's
just,
a great one. Yeah.
Joe just wrote in the chat, the honey bear, or the honey pot with the bear. So I don't know if you guys remember Cami Thurderson's keynote at the summit, but this was such a great idea. This presentation is linked in the shared folder, and on this slide is linked an explanation of this story, because I'm definitely going to botch it up. But basically, an electrical company was trying to figure out how to get ice off of the electrical lines, and they engaged in a brainstorming session with a facilitator because they couldn't figure out how to solve this problem. And through the process, because people were throwing out crazy ideas, and you have to read the story that I linked in here, but because people were throwing out crazy ideas, they were building on each other, and they came up with the solution. And the way they came up with it was through all of these bizarre, crazy ideas, but it kept triggering people's imagination, and it kept triggering different parts of our own experiences. And so ultimately someone had put forth ultimately was the solution, but she never would have got there had she not been triggered by all of these other creative ideas. So go ahead and click on that and read that when you guys have time. It's a great example. Thanks, Joe. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome. That was a great example of that crazy idea. I think it was something about use the helicopter to come down and fix the wires. And then someone said the action from the blades can actually knock the ice off the wires. Right. If we just fly the helicopter over the wires that have been iced over, and it was like. It was just a brilliant solution, and they would have never thought of it if somehow helicopters hadn't been introduced into the conversation, right?
To bring the honey pots to the top of the electrical.
Awesome, that's great. Thanks.
The other, Eric, I don't know if you can tell the other example of one of the districts we've worked with, which sort of revealed an opportunity through the brainstorming process, which was the social worker example from Becker.
Yeah. Well, that's a great example. Again, I often use that example when I'm talking about lean solutions, but so many of our members, when they open up their challenge to their staff with an open challenge, invariably you're going to get some ideas around mental health, because it's such a tragic, epidemic right now around anxiety and depression, and obviously help kids, and this was the number one idea in Becker, and it was that year it happened to be number one idea in Minnetonka too. So we got together and did some kind of shared ideation and workshopping around that problem, and their idea in Becker was to hire more counselors or social workers, and obviously that is not a lean solution, so that was not going to happen. And that's something that we really have to emphasize. We'll do that in the next webinar, that notion of lean that really comes in at the prototype and test stage towards the end. But this idea that it cannot be an expensive solution like hiring more counselors, that's not going to happen. But when they were given that constraint, that lean constraint, and forced to be more creative, what they came up with was the idea that they would partner with the state university that was nearby to be a location where social work candidates get hours. So they essentially opened up a drop-in center for students who were experiencing some anxiety or depression, and they had a drop-in center for those kids to get to be able to talk to somebody, and it cost the district nothing, and it built this great relationship with the local state university that was really positive and healthy. So yeah, it's just you have to really believe that this process works. Even as we talk about the big scary ideas, the BSIs, it's like, oh my God, we can't afford a new building. We can't afford this. It's like, trust the process. Mm-hmm. Get into that space and put the constraints out there, and trust that people will be creative, and they will come up with ideas that, I always say this, I guarantee as leaders, we wouldn't think of the solutions that they're going to offer. And it really does, it does come up. You really get some great stories to share. So looks like there's another chat there. Joe. Oh, today we had a joking, throw out an idea of having students get a reservation type notification when can have an appointment with counselor, brought laughter, but I think he's really onto something. Wanted to say, yeah, that's great, Joe. Yeah, I love that. Do you want to say anything about it? Are you still on, Joe, or did you have to cut away?
I'm here. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, no, I just think that was it was said, and he was kind of like joking. Everybody's kind of laughing because it's like, oh, kids are going to get like a notification on their phone, and
Yep.
like we would, when you go to your restaurant, they text you, and I was like, but if that could be, that's like the groundwork of an idea. Maybe it's not an app, or but maybe we're onto something that our system of kids down checking in and then trying to call in the classrooms, interrupting classrooms can be avoided
Yep.
if we think of a creative idea like that. And I think that is spurring this. That's what it's all about, right? And so maybe it's not that, but suggest that idea and let us work through that, maybe through this process, if that gets the votes and stuff. So I think that's kind of stuff that I'm excited about getting through this process.
Thanks.
Exactly. But you see the culture that we live in, though, where people do judge ideas. They do judge the feasibility of ideas. And so he gets laughter at that. That's why the design workshop with those norms is meant to really put people in a place where that is encouraged
Right.
and formed.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, I literally just sent him a follow-up email asking him to make that suggestion on our platform so that we can see where it goes. So those are,
Cool.
yes, it is a cultural thing, and we got to try to slowly shift that. And so I think this is a good start for that.
Good for you. And I mean, I think like we use Schoology, and Schoology has a notification system built in. So a lot of times the LMSs have a notification or messaging component. A lot of districts turn that off or don't have it active. But there are some pretty creative ways of solving these problems, and you got to get people are really encouraged to share. And yeah, awesome, Joe. Thanks for sharing that story. I appreciate it. So we're just about to the end here, and I just I want to get back to this kind of visual that we're trying to create here, where you've got this. You took this one cluster, this defined statement. How might we, organize the hallways before school so that they aren't so crowded and hectic. So now we've ideated around that, right? And so we took that problem, all the feelings and emotions of crowded space. We've ideated around this specific part of the problem, right? The morning, the half hour before school starts. You got to get really focused, okay? But now we flare out with our creative solutions. So imagine now we've got a wall covered with Post-it notes, and now we have to do the same thing. We've got to with your sort of 5 minutes remaining. You got to group those solutions by theme, kind of pockets of solutions, and now you're looking at again 10 or so different possibilities. So here we go again with that kind of, where's the low-hanging fruit? What one of these ideas do we feel like, that's crazy enough to work, or this seems like a really realistic and inexpensive way to try to solve this problem? You're looking at these problems and then you're picking one. So it's a flare in that you brainstormed, but there's a little focuser at the end where it's like, look, we can't do all 10 of these. We're not going to build 10 prototypes, okay? We're going to build one prototype. And that's where we're a little bit different from IDEO or some of the other design thinking coaches, in that, we don't think that schools necessarily have the resources to build multiple prototypes. So you got to choose. And so this is a little bit of a mini sort of focus right here. I thought I just saw a couple of chats come up here. Let me pause.
It's just asking about training the trainers
and
just increasing the skills of district leaders to be able to do this. So I just answered that we can coach people, and we can also come out and do that for them.
Yeah, right on. And Joe just made a note there. He had to go do lunch duty and wants to know how to access the recorded version. So we'll make sure we get that to everybody here afterwards. But that is, and Andy, to your question about training, that's, that is something that, we want to help with. So there's a couple of different ways we can do that. So we can take that offline and just chat, via email or set up a cell call. We can do some of that work virtually, or we could even come on site if you prefer. So we can talk more about that offline, but I just want to say thanks to everybody who's checked in on the webinar. Again, this is recorded so people can watch this whenever, and that's something we really encourage, and people say they really appreciate having these resources available so they can go back and view. We try to be quick here but we've gone a little bit long, 40 minutes. Sorry. We really do try to do this in 20 minutes, but it's tough. This is important stuff. So anyway, apologize for running a little bit long.